Mike, Francis, you hear us okay?
Loud and clear.
Great. Give us guidance on time. How much time should we take to cover this item?
We usually like to end by 2, so we're running short. So if you could go faster, and the other items on our agenda, we can probably skip over, so I would not worry about them.
Okay. So half hour is okay, Francis, for a total conversation presentation?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So we have been working primarily with Mike and Francis on this study. So EntryPoint was hired by the COG, and part of the scope of work is to make it more accessible to all the members of the COG to understand the key issues they should be, the members should be thinking about, and then to work through specific things like projected costs. If a city wants to pursue building municipal fiber optics, what kind of cost structures will they be looking at? What are the steps in the process, that kind of thing. So today is an introductory presentation. So really the point today is, why should a city or town, a municipality in Connecticut, be thinking about municipally owned infrastructure? Obviously, it would be a significant project for any town to take this on. And so really, we're going to walk you through reasons why you ought to at least be considering it, and the value proposition both to the town and to the residents and businesses within the town. And then there's going to be a little bit of an emphasis on strategic considerations, meaning as we look down the road 5-10 years and further, what is the potential impact of decisions that get made now relative to this area? So I'm going to share my screen. So just by way of introduction, Devin and I are both founders of EntryPoint. Our expertise is in the open access world, and what open access means is the traditional ISP model that you'll see from Comcast, Charter, others, Frontier, Verizon, is that the ISP owns both the infrastructure and the services that run across it. Open access is the idea where the infrastructure is shared and you've got a marketplace of ISPs so subscribers can choose. And I'll describe this more. That's our particular expertise. Right now, we're doing 11 municipal projects in Massachusetts, 2 municipal projects in New York, and this project with the COG, and then 1 other town in a different COG in Connecticut. So regionally, that's what we're doing. We're actually based out in Utah and Idaho. We have a lot of work in California. Our biggest project is the city of Detroit. So that'll kind of give you a sense of who we are. So to start with, I think this is obvious to all of you, but it's a key point, which is communications no longer just a sector of the economy, it is the economy. That may seem like overstating it, but I don't think it is, in terms of increasingly the economy is moving digital, and increasingly it's moving to the cloud. So more and more applications are moving not only online, but they're also moving to the cloud. And as they do that, that's important because that has an impact on the network, reliability, availability, etc. The pandemic, if it did anything, it helped us understand how important these networks are.
Jeff, you might want to run in slideshow mode. That way they'll see a little bit better.
Okay. So you all know about strategy. The only point we're going to make here is strategy is about looking down the road. It's about trying to understand the future, which is hard for all of us to do. The question at the bottom, do you have a digital infrastructure strategy? you all do, it may be your strategies to continue to allow the private sector to handle this area. And that's, that works to a certain degree. That's the dominant strategy across the country, but there are a growing number of municipalities who feel like they've got to develop expertise in this domain, and it's no longer working to allow the private sector just to control this 100%. So, this begs the question, are we at the point where this is essential infrastructure? And we're not there from a policy point of view. We're not treating this as essential infrastructure from a policy point of view today. We're moving that direction. And I think public opinion moved that direction strongly because of COVID. So, I think this is a fundamental question, a strategic one that we'll come back to at the end here. But it's, as you wrestle with these things, this is a key question for you to ask yourselves and other leadership is, are we there today? As we look down the road, 5 years, 10 years, should we be thinking about this as essential infrastructure from a policy point of view? The people who feel most strongly about this are the ones that have really unreliable or poor connectivity. For those of us that have somewhat of a reliable connection, it's a less pressing matter, but you represent broad constituent groups, and so you've got to think about that group. I will note that when we say essential, it really gets to the question of how important is it to connect everyone. So with water, with sewer, with electricity, there is an assumption that to participate in society, you are going to be connected. I don't think there's a debate that broadband is moving that direction, but this is where the strategy comes in. All right. I think everybody's aware of fiber optics. You may not be aware of how big a difference there is between fiber and everything else. So these little dots represent DSL, which is what Frontier and Verizon have had historically. They're starting to do some fiber. Starlink is Elon Musk's low orbit satellite system. Cable is what most people in the country have. And that's, I think Comcast is probably dominant in your area, or Charter. Then there's a lot of marketing around 5G and what 5G can do. I have a friend in Texas who messaged me over the weekend and said he just got his 5G home device and it was measuring like 5 megabits down. So he was it was a little bit deflationary after all the marketing he'd heard. So the difference between all of these and fiber, this is not hyperbole. This is not an exaggeration. It's actually an understatement. They've demonstrated fiber at 150 terabits per second. That means 150 million megabits per second. I think the national average is still under 100 megabits for download. And so we're saying fiber has shown this much capacity. We're illustrating here 25 million megabits per second, or 25 terabits. So there's no question that fiber is going to win. We are going to all move to fiber. It's really a question of time on when we're going to move to fiber. Cable killed the phone companies because they had a bigger pipe. Cables won. They won. DSL lost, and that's decided. And they won because they have a bigger pipe. And look at the magnitude of difference between the cable pipe and fiber. The only reason we don't all have fiber today is the entrenched interests want to preserve the status quo, and people don't understand the magnitude of difference here. If I were writing the rules for the federal government, I'm not, I would have not funded any project except fiber. I would just say, to start with, we're not putting any money into anything but fiber optics, because fiber optics is the future. To build new cable networks is a corporate subsidy. They're established, they'll build, they know how to do it, but it doesn't make sense to put money into anything but fiber because of its capacity.
And Jeff, if you go back a slide, I just wanted to show everybody, because our slideshow is a little washed out. If you show that big circle, show all the circles together.
Yep.
So you can see, you can see on the screen though, the size difference. This is to scale. The
Yeah,
difference
sorry.
Much.
To make that darker.
It's a little washed out on our projector.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so it's, I mean, it's really kind of ridiculous that there's any conversation about anything other than fiber, except for, you know, if you got a cabin 60 miles from civilization, Starlink makes sense. But 5G depends on fiber. Without fiber, there's no 5G. So they're really complementary and not competitive. But anyway, I made my point here. Another key thing, the amount of data growth in data consumption has been doubling every 3 years since the internet emerged. So every 3 years, data consumption is doubling. So if that trend continues, you can see where we are, you know, today, between 400 and 800 gigabits. You know, you run that out 20 years, you know, it illustrates the point. We are going to fiber because nothing else can do this. I mean, it's just not going to work. The other thing, most of the networks getting built in the country are shared networks. That means a bunch of neighbors are sharing a node. In cable, it's up to 200 neighbors are sharing a node. The further you get from the node, the faster the signal degrades. Again, our opinion, if you're gonna jump into the space, you should only build dedicated networks where neighbors aren't affecting each other's reliability. Because as data consumption grows, as our dependence on the network grows, reliability will become increasingly important. As everything is in the cloud, that impacts reliability. So we can build switched networks. That's what happens in the data center. Everything's switched, not shared. And so this would dramatically improve the reliability of networks around the country if we would stop building shared networks and give everybody their own dedicated connection into a switch. So just a reliability point. Same thing with symmetrical. It doesn't make sense that we're building asymmetrical networks, which is some fiber networks, DSL and cable, which means you have a good download and not a very good upload. So with fiber, for reliability purposes, we should just build symmetrical networks, same upload and download. Kind of still making the point, we've got 8K video that's emerging, and 8K video, the bottom underlined point here, there are no ISPs, even fiber providers, who would be ready for large scale adoption of 8K video on the web. It would basically tip all those networks over. If we didn't have any shared networks, it wouldn't be a problem. So if everybody had Ethernet dedicated networks, they could consume this and wouldn't skip a beat. They just keep moving. They'd have to be fiber. So, you know, again, getting to reliability, we can build really reliable networks. The technology exists, it's existed for a long time. We continue to build marginally reliable networks because it's the practice. All right, so back to our question. Why should a town in Connecticut, why should a town in WestCOG think about this? So the one that gets the national press is digital divide, and that's a problem. Comcast and Charter maintain an absolute monopoly over at least 47 million people. At least 83 million Americans can only access broadband through a single provider. So Comcast and Charter have half of that, but 83 million Americans have one option. They have a monopoly. So one answer to the why, we've got a lack of competition, and we've got availability gaps. You've probably got availability gaps in some of your towns, maybe all of your towns. And the next point is affordability. We know from research that's been done that affordability is a bigger problem than availability. All of this federal money that's coming out, or nearly all of it, except for ARPA, nearly all of the infrastructure money is funding miles instead of people. And that, you know, it's a problem, but they are going out and funding the really rural stuff, $46 billion. and not, the focus is not on affordability. It's on availability, and it's primarily on rural availability. And I think from a policy point of view, we should be somewhere in the middle. We should be doing both. There should be a stronger emphasis on affordability, and it is like a 3-to-1, 3 times bigger problem than availability. So anyway, this, in terms of tabulating your why, these monopolies are a problem, and the whole mindset and the history behind them, we need to change so that we're not stuck with fiber monopolies. So lack of competition is a problem, availability gaps, reliability gaps, affordability gaps. Those are 4 of the reasons on why a town in Connecticut and WestCOG should be thinking about this. All right, so now I'm going to talk about open access. So the metaphor we use here is that if we build our roads the way we build digital roads, these communication networks, then we would give FedEx their own road, nobody else could drive on it, and we give UPS their road, nobody else could drive on it. And so the metaphor for open access is, why don't we just build one really good road? Let's just build a fiber road, fiber network that's, switched, not shared, symmetrical, and then let everybody drive on it. And really what's happened historically, we had the voice, AT&T and company, telecommunications, they had infrastructure, and the cable companies had infrastructure. One of the biggest ones is in your state, Charter. So we had Charter, Comcast, Cox, and they basically rolled up their industries. So they went out and bought up, there were thousands of smaller cable companies out there. They basically got private equity money and rolled up their industry. Both the telecommunications and the cable companies figured out how to get the internet to run across their infrastructure. And because they all had infrastructure out there, that became the model. We figured out how to do it on our infrastructure. We've got the infrastructure in place. Therefore, the internet today runs across their infrastructure in this closed access model. What they're doing is they're competing on the infrastructure. So it's the infrastructure that protects them from competition. But if we switch the model and we had shared infrastructure, then we could move to competition at the service layer. So a move from competing infrastructures to one really good infrastructure, and then move competition to the service layer. That can happen in software. It can happen inexpensively once the network's built, and it will have a significant impact on price. We know it does. We've demonstrated it does. I think we've actually proved it based on stuff that's already happened. So that's the idea of open access, is one shared infrastructure. Stop competing at the infrastructure layer, because you're going to keep tearing up the roads. You're going to keep putting in more infrastructure when one good fiber network will do the job. The other thing is, you think about it, the easy button for a city or town is to have somebody else solve this problem for them. Some other fiber provider build the fiber network. For those who do that, you're going to end up with a private monopoly forever over this infrastructure, and there are consequences to that in price and service and other things. So we believe cities and towns are the right neutral host. Cities and towns are aligned with their constituents and what they want from these networks, which means the best possible price, reliability, availability, perfect alignment with cities and towns and their constituents. Once you get to private sector, and we're a private sector company, so I believe in the free market. But once you move it to the private sector, you're going to have a private sector monopoly with different interests than your constituents have. So this is an example. This is the first place that we deployed this model. It's out in Idaho, a city called Ammon, but I'll just show you how this works once you move competition to the service layer. Someone would come in, they would see ISP options, they'd find the price they want, and then clicking buttons. Software will do all the provisioning. You don't need a truck to come to your house. You don't need to make an appointment. It's just like shopping on Amazon. And then you've got your service. So if you want to unsubscribe, you do the same. Find a better price, or you don't like the service, or there's an outage, you just go switch. So this is the idea of moving to an open access model, using automation and pushing competition to the service provider layer as opposed to at the infrastructure layer. So I'm going to pause and just see if there's any questions on any of this content I've covered so far, just because I'm kind of moving quickly. We good? Okay. We do think it's possible. So in Ammon today, for someone who moves into a new home, they're paying $27 for symmetrical gig. And that's because the infrastructure gets paid off in the building process. So that's a separate cost. But for their ISP service, they're paying $10 for a symmetrical gig, 1,000 up, 1,000 down. And they're paying $20 a month, $16.50 actually, to the city to maintain and operate the network. And so the path to getting to a $30 gig, we think, is municipal. Otherwise, right now, you're at least at $70 as a national average. And then when you layer in taxes, fees, and other things, you're pushing up 80 plus. To get to gig, you're probably up around $125 as an average nationally. And so you think about, what if we end up with a fiber monopoly? What's that going to look like? So another reason for cities and towns to take this seriously. The other thing, the other concept, this is a little, it's a little futuristic, even though it exists today. Today, all we're doing across these networks is the ISP. But when you move to a software-defined model, which means build good infrastructure, then put a good software layer on top of it to run the network, you can actually do really interesting networking things that are done every day in the data center. And then you just apply them to a city or municipal context. And we call this virtualization. And what it means is that you create separate software networks. So again, this is across a single fiber strand. And we use software to separate the traffic and create essentially separate networks. They're software networks, but you really could, you could work from home across a private network, not across the internet, across a dedicated private network. And this is the kind of stuff that doesn't matter today because people don't have it. We think it's going to matter a lot 10 years from now. So we think this is what's emerging. And this kind of capability doesn't matter until it matters. And we think it will matter 5-10 years from now. People are going to want and expect it. For time's sake, I'm going to keep moving. I think the last point I want to make here is there's been a lot of evolution. As we look back, 50s to 90s, we had large mainframe computers. As we went into the 90s to 2020, everybody had their own PC, their own laptop, and their own cell phone, which is basically they had a computer in their pocket. A lot of evolution there. Now we're moving into a phase that, some people refer to as immersive, where everything in the environment's going to get connected to the network. Other people call it the mesh, the software. So with the software, we went from World Wide Web to social networks, and now we're moving into this mesh environment. And it's really the same as immersive. It means we're going to connect anything we want to communicate with, anything we want to manage. We are going to give it an IP address and communicate with it. And this is the next phase we're moving into. What you should understand it is much more bandwidth demand, and automation and software are going to become increasingly important. Scott Schenker, who teaches out of Berkeley, one of the founders of software-defined networking, he said, everything interesting will happen in software at the edge. So networks are going to matter. Networks are the foundation that will enable all of this. The quality of your foundation will matter. The software capability of your foundation will matter. And the openness, open meaning, can somebody do something across that network other than your cable company? So open doesn't mean it's wide open for hackers. It means it's open to innovation and open to new solutions. So on the sort of the last point to reinforce that, we started with IPv4. That's what is dominant today. We're moving to IPv6. So when we started, there were 4 billion total worldwide addresses. And think of this just like your home address. Your IP address is the way that a packet of information gets to you. And the analogy is very similar to the way the physical mail works. So we started with 4 billion. That seemed like a lot at the time. And they didn't think that everybody in the world would have a cell phone in their pocket, perhaps. But we're now going to IPv6, and the reason is that 4 billion is not enough. We're running out of address space. So they've built IPv6 with essentially unlimited address space. To underscore that, our company, which is a consulting firm, and we work in open access technologies, but we're not an ISP. Last year, we were given 18 quintillion IPv6 addresses. Not for us, but for our clients. So the way we calculate that, we figured that we could give 200,000 cities, we would like to have that many clients, we don't. 200,000 cities, we could give them each 1 trillion IPv6 addresses. And so you think, what would you do with all of those IP addresses? Why is that necessary? So EntryPoint has way, 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 way more than the total IPv4 global address space. Just, our small company has way, way, way more than the total existing space. So the reason we need all this space is we're going to give everything an IP address. So this tech blogger says, in the world I see my toaster, my alarm clock, my oven, my garage doors, my hot water heater, all of these will have their own IP address. And we think this guy's right. You're going to give your dog or your cat an IP address, and you will never lose your dog once that happens. You won't lose your cat. Our cars will come with IP addresses. And so when we want to communicate with these things, we're going to have our own address space. It's going to be enough to connect everything we want. And it's a good way to understand where we're going. What are we going to? And if you're going to think strategically, the network is the foundation. And so what's it going to cost? How reliable is it? How open is it? How much control do we have locally over local interests? That's why you should be thinking about this problem. In terms of money, I'm about out of time. Let me see here. A lot, there's an existing revenue stream. That's a key thing. We think in most cities and towns in the US, some of them are a lot more expensive to build in. Downtown Boston, downtown New York. But most cities and towns, we believe that we can provide a meaningful drop in price, what people are paying today, and 10 to 40x improvement in speed. And that's for today. That means taking them up to gig speeds. The beauty of fiber, though, is you can change from 1 gig to 10 gig to 100 gig, not by changing the fiber, but by changing the electronics that the fiber is connected to. So you can go up to whatever speed you need, not by changing the fiber, just by changing the electronics. So it is future-proof. At least for all of our lives, it's future-proof. And we've got this existing revenue stream that's out there. So the real question is, how do we tap that existing revenue stream to put in really good infrastructure that's reliable and is going to take us 50 years down the road? And so a key thing is the money's there. We just have to sort of reroute the flow of the money. The way we break this down is we break it into infrastructure, maintenance and operation, and services. And let's use those higher ends of the ranges. If you can do infrastructure for $25 per month per premise, 20-year finance, we think most cities and towns can maintain and operate the network for $20 a month. And we've demonstrated that we can do symmetrical gig at $10 a month when you move them to the cloud and force them to compete. So that means for $55, you can deliver symmetrical gig, which is about half, a little more than half of the national average for gig. And when that top line gets paid off, the infrastructure line, like other utilities, it goes away. Once you pay off your infrastructure, you're just left with maintenance and operation and ISP. That's one way to get to $30 gig, is follow that model. So last slide, back to Kevin Kelly. If we fail to enlarge the possibilities for other people, we diminish them, and that's unforgivable. Enlarging the scope of creativity for others then is an obligation. So I think this is an important reason why, is for all of us who are trying to do things to improve the future. The network's fundamental to the future. It's the economy's running on it. Much of our lives are running on it. Mark Andreessen, who many of you know, he's one of the most important venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. Wrote Netscape, the first browser. Just 2 weeks ago, he said the shift to work from home will be viewed as an earthquake for civilization as people look back in time. So an earthquake for civilization. So people are going to be able to live wherever they want to live, as long as they have a good network. And that's a dominant trend now. And so if you want people to live in your town and want to live in your town, the network's really fundamental to that. So anyway, covered a lot of land there in a short amount of time, but really meant to be an introduction. We've got a survey that Cricket shared. I don't know that we have time to walk you through it right now. We would like everybody to do it and either turn in the paper and pencil version before you leave, or do it online. It'll probably take you 2 to 3 minutes. And this is for the benefit of the project we're doing with the COG. So if you'll do it before you forget about it, there's maybe 8 questions, but we want to get your feedback, and then we want to have future interaction with this group as we're going to come back to present findings on this project and then figure out where do we go from here. So questions though, before we close this out.
Yeah, I have a question. It's really
Yes.
Mark Cody. The reality of attaining success here in Connecticut, pretty much the telecommunication capital of this country,
Yep.
makes it a very difficult mountain to climb. Do you feel we can be successful in that effort?
Devin and I have been doing this for 10 years, so we're a little bit jaded in terms of what happens with grant money. The rules, the ideals come out initially, and then the lobbyists go to work on the rules. I think if we look back on where this money is going to all flow, it's going to all flow to the incumbents, or not all of it. Most of it's going to flow to the incumbents. We think. We'll see. History will tell. So if you're if you're focused on we can only do this if we get grants, then I think you've got a very difficult mountain to climb, because the rules have been bent not in your favor. But if you do it with the idea that the money's there and we're just going to bite the bullet, and we're going to lower the cost for people, what they're paying today, we're going to lower their costs, and we're going to build a network for the future, then yeah, it's an infrastructure project, but it's not, it's more of a hill to climb than a mountain to climb. So I think it's difficult to get grant money, but the projects are still doable.
Yeah, we've tried it here locally, and it's a tough sale to make to a lot of people who are in elected positions that are my age, I'll put it that way.
Yes, yeah.
And I think if we had a younger generation making decisions right now, it'd be unquestionable the direction we would head in. How do we change that issue in getting people to understand the severe need for the fiber, and that as a municipality, we can achieve it with pretty much a revenue neutral project that can really bring us into the future with fiber?
Yeah, I think you've hit on something really key. I mean, there is, complacency and leadership are the key variables. So the best projects are ones that have the right, energetic leadership on this issue.
Are you willing to make presentations to our municipalities?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the other thing I'd say is don't try to eat the elephant, because if you try and, these projects are momentum projects, and this is what we're doing in Detroit. Detroit's, I don't need to tell you the history of Detroit. I think you all know it. We're going into the toughest, or one of the toughest neighbors in Detroit. We're going to connect 2,000 homes. They're using ARPA money to do it. And our prediction is that those 2,000 homes will result in a citywide project, because the momentum is going to shift, and it's going to shift significantly once they see what this looks like, and once they get it actually working. And so I don't even think all of you would have to do it to start. I think if some of you do it, then you would see a ripple effect across the COG. Once people see what it is, what it costs, what are the mechanics to make it happen. And so don't try to eat the elephant. And it is really key to find leadership and build the momentum behind the project.
But community engagement is probably the #1 most fundamental thing that you need to do in this, because everybody needs to be educated, and you've got to get their buy-in. So we spend a lot of emphasis on community engagement and education.
Thank you.
I've got to drop to another call, but Jeff can stay on for a few minutes if you guys have additional questions. Thank you for your time.
I don't know if we have any questions in the room. I would be really interested in discussing with EntryPoint a presentation in our community anyway about the importance of this topic for our future.
Okay.
That would be an aside from the COG, obviously.
Yep.
I mean, we are looking to identify the primest or ripest areas in the COG for this. And we do have not only the survey for the CEOs to fill out, but we have the survey for all of the end users, a separate one to fill out. And that information could be very insightful for more local presentations.
Yeah, so EntryPoints, we're happy to come out. We would want to coordinate if there's 2 or 3 that are interested in that, or 10. We want to work through the COG just for efficiency reasons, and to share information across the COG. So we want to work through Francis and Mike, etc. And but we're more than happy to do it. More than happy to work locally with individual towns.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Well, thank you all for your time.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay, I'll drop Mike and Francis. Thank you.
Thanks.
Question